Well, it was bound to happen sooner or later. I've already talked a little bit about Fullmetal Alchemist on this channel. The link will be in the card and in the description, but fair warning, it is a very old video featuring some very mediocre art. I think I also mentioned Edward specifically in possibly the first video I ever did on disability, so it's more than sensible to do a video on the series as a whole, now that I actually kind of know what I'm doing. Kind of being the operative term there. So, Fullmetal Alchemist is a manga written by Hiromu Arakawa that ran from 2001 until 2010. There's also some light novels, which I will not be talking about because I've never read them. It was first adapted into an anime in 2003, long before the manga was finished. If you're at all familiar with anime, this is a dilemma I'm sure you've run into before. Because it was so premature as an adaptation, it had to continue the story beyond the material it had to adapt. So, naturally, the story of the 2003 anime veers wildly off course from the manga. I won't be talking about it either. Mostly because I never finished watching it. The second anime series, Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, started in 2009 and follows the manga much more faithfully, though it's not without its flaws either. Because the 2003 series already existed, Brotherhood took a speedrun kind of approach to the first few arcs in the manga, resulting in some awkward side effects, like the fact that they had to introduce Yoki as if he was a recurring character when he became relevant to the plot again after they placed the story he was introduced in entirely off-screen. They also shuffled around the order of events a little bit for the first few episodes of the anime versus the start of the manga. It's not unforgivable, but it does result in some issues I had with the pacing, but didn't fully understand until after I'd read the manga. See, the anime starts with 2 whole episodes of setup and backstory. On a certain level, I appreciate their decision to start the series with the Elrics fighting against someone trying to destroy Central Command, for the full circle feel we get in the end when it turns on its head and now they're the ones fighting the Central Forces. But from a pure story perspective, the way the manga does it is much better. We get one single, one-page flashback to the human transmutation disaster, just enough to get us curious, then we get dumped directly into Lior. For one thing, this allows the audience to discover who the Elrics are alongside the characters around them. Furthermore, Lior is, naturally, because Arakawa knew what she was doing, the perfect place to kick off this tale. It comes packed with so many extremely natural points of exposition. Its themes and plot beats are perfect to introduce both the base concept of this world we have found ourselves in, and the brothers themselves, along with their backstory. The following story introduces Yoki and the concept of military corruption, and only then do we actually meet Mustang and his crew, in a story wherein a general becomes a target hostage during a train jacking. It just flows much better than the anime. But on the other hand, the anime is a lot better around how it talks about Ed's disability from the jump. In the manga, Ed uses his and Al's bodies as a tool of horror to try and dissuade Rose from the idea of bringing a human back to life. Meanwhile, in the anime, Father Cornello tries to use the brothers in a similar vein but flipped to his benefit, and Ed just ignores him, essentially. Doesn't even dignify his ableist prodding with a response. And whenever he and Al talk about getting their bodies back, Everything about how Ed talks makes it so clear that he's only going along with the idea of getting his arm and leg back for Al's sake. Sure, part of it is a misplaced sense of penance, but that's the kind of internalized ableism that is honestly extremely realistic from a character like Ed. At the end of the day, he'd still be fine if he could only restore his brother's body. That's really the reason I'm so chill with this storyline, because to me it's been clear since day one that Al is the true focus. So let's talk about Al, actually. He's a human soul bound to a suit of armor. He can think and speak and move, but he can't feel anything, he can't eat, and he can't sleep. And as we find out later, the longer he stays in the armor, the more likely it is to reject him. Taking especially that last bit into account, the closest parallel to something in the real world would be a prolonged illness, one with an extremely slim but not non-existent chance of recovery. Even the conversations Ed and Al have about what Al will do once he has his body back sound like that. The way they speak, especially Ed, he sounds like he's trying to keep up a positive attitude in a near-hopeless situation. Which, I mean, he is, so... This reading is only further strengthened when we actually get a look at Alphonse's body inside the portal. It hasn't remained in stasis, nor has it grown in any kind of healthy way. When Alphonse eventually does get his body back, or in our analogy, when he crests the hill and enters the path to certain recovery, it is not an easy road. His body is emaciated and weak beyond belief from years of neglect. His recovery is going to take time. And we see this clear as day in things like how he needs to rest on his return to Resembool, how just the effort of walking from the train station to the Rock Bells is clearly monumental. But, of course, Alphonse is not the only Elric relevant to this discussion, so we've gotta talk about Edward. Now, his case is a lot more cut and dry. He is disabled in a way that is very much possible in the real world, despite his advanced prosthetics. On the subject of automail, though, this is one of the very few cases I've seen where this kind of prosthesis has realistic drawbacks. In every other setting where a character gets a prosthetic that functions nearly identically to their lost limb, the plot stops there, and the writers act like they can just forget about it. Automail, on the other hand, is heavy and expensive and extremely painful to install. The weight of Ed's arm possibly contributed to stunting his growth, too. The standard model can't be taken into climates that are either too cold or too hot for fear of complications, because you have metal attached to your literal nerves. Not to mention, they're extremely complex machines, which need highly skilled mechanics to ensure they remain functional. There are valid reasons to choose automail over a standard prosthesis, but they have to be weighed carefully against these drawbacks. It's a much more realistic and nuanced take on this kind of thing than most other media I've seen. What the manga does better than the anime here is it actually shows that the Rock Bells don't just make automail. They also make regular prosthetics. But in the end, Ed still regains his flesh arm, doesn't he? This is true, and it is kind of bullshit, but it's like a milder tier of bullshit. Not as bad as it could have been. Ed getting his arm back was due to an extremely heat-of-the-moment rash gamble by Al to undo the transmutation that sealed his soul to the armor. The arm Ed gets back, however, is rail-thin and weak, just as Alphonse's entire body. Beyond that, he had his automail on and fully attached when Al did the transmutation, leaving Ed's shoulder chock full of metal that should not be there. He, just like Al, has a long road to recovery here. Even at peak condition with the scarring and the extremely delicate surgeries he no doubt had to go through to remove the remnants of his automail, I doubt his shoulder will ever be the same. That and the fact that his leg stays amputated is the reason I'm fine with this ending for him. Well, that, and in drawing his brother back out of the portal of truth, Ed essentially swapped one disability for another. It's just that the other disability is more of the fantasy variety. Because to get Alphonse back, he essentially amputates his own gate of truth, the thing which allows him to do alchemy. And this gate isn't unique to alchemists in the series. Everyone in this world can do alchemy. It is a science one can study. Ed can still study the texts, but he will never again be able to do anything concrete with them. So I'm gonna go ahead and say that in a universe where alchemy is a thing, and everyone could do it if they wanted to, not being able to do it at all would count as a disability. Is it a stretch? Maybe a little, but I'll take it. So as far as Ed and Al are concerned, the series does an overall pretty good job, but they're not the only disabled characters, which is honestly great because I so rarely run across a series where there are so many that I might actually just forget to mention one of them.
Like Captain Buccaneer. I can't believe I forgot about him when he personally tears my heart right out of my chest every time I rewatch Brotherhood. I am a failure and a fraud.
We have supporting characters like Panina lan-fan once she cuts her own arm off to distract Bradley, Izumi Curtis, the Elric's alchemy teacher, Second Lieutenant Jean Havoc, and Colonel Roy Mustang himself. I don't have much to say about Panina from a disability point of view. She's a bilateral above-the-knee amputee, and her adoptive father made automail for her, which he also outfitted with what is essentially a tiny cannon and a sword, because why not, I guess? In her own words, her automail gave her a new lease on life, but she was also put through an intensely painful surgery without her consent, as an incredibly young, already traumatized child. I can't imagine that didn't leave some scars on her psyche. Still, she's such a minor character that these questions will just have to remain questions, sadly. But just in case I need to clarify this, no, putting kids through invasive, traumatizing, not medically necessary surgeries without their consent is not a good thing. Ever. It's great that Panina is happy with the results now that she's grown up, but that doesn't make the initial action any less fucked up. Especially considering there are other, less invasive options. Like I've already said, regular prosthetics exist in this world, and the flashback scene in which we witness the start of her adoption is absolutely horrifying. I know the point is that Dominic is gruff and seems mean, but he means well. That doesn't make seeing a fully grown man callously pluck a disabled homeless child away from her only mobility aid any easier. Lan-fan is, well, she's a harsh but not entirely unrealistic view of what some people go through upon becoming disabled. Especially if this disability is, as it almost was for her, a career-ending injury. She sees automail as her only hope. Later in the series, we also see her push her new automail far beyond what she should be doing with it, considering she's still in the very early healing process. That's just, in general, realistic. I know so many disabled people who have just learned to shut up and try to push through, when the best option for them is actually to slow down and rest. Truth be told, I am one. I'm working on it, but it's not an easy habit to kick. Ironic fact, as I am recording this, I am having one of the worst pain days I've had in ages, and I'm still standing up in a closet, which is not a good idea, and I recognize that, but I'm still gonna finish recording this. Thankfully, she does get a happy ending, serving at Ling's side as his loyal shadow. Presumably, her automail also heals fine, despite her less-than-wise choices during the series. Izumi Curtis is, however, the most personally relatable disabled character to me in this entire series. Sure, we're not even close when it comes to what kind of disabilities we have, but still. Izumi lost part of her internal organs after she tried to bring back her stillborn child. As you can imagine, this has caused her some issues, such as throwing up blood and requiring more rest than before, and apparently some trouble breathing as well. The scene where she's sitting in bed resting because her body has it out for her is extremely relatable, and I just love her in general. She's disabled, she's an extremely badass alchemist, and she's a housewife. These are not conflicting statements. God, I love her. And her husband. And their relationship. Just everything about the Curtises is delightful. But, of course, I do have to discuss what happened when Izumi met Hohenheim. Again, here we run into the problem of abled people deciding they know what's best for disabled people, and forging on full steam ahead without so much as a by your leave. Hohenheim meets Izumi, realizes what her problem is, and without even telling her what he's about to do, sticks his hand through her stomach to do what is essentially a reparative surgery. He doesn't cure her, he can't give back what the truth took, after all, but he likely added a not insignificant number of years to her life expectancy, and I'm sure the fact that she can breathe easier and probably won't be throwing up blood anymore is a relief to her. This would be fine, honestly a great outcome for her, if not for the complete lack of informed consent. Again, that's 2 characters now that's happened to. Technically 3 if we count Ed with his arm, but I feel like there were extenuating circumstances there, including but not limited to the fact that getting his flesh limbs back was ostensibly part of his quest this entire time. So in short, I love Izumi, I love that she'll probably live longer because of this. Super don't love how it went down. Jean Havoc is one of the characters who becomes disabled during the story. Lust stabs him, resulting in a spinal injury. As you can imagine, for a military man, this is indeed a career-ending injury. He retires to go work for his family's general goods store, and we don't see much of him until the final confrontation in Central, where it turns out that he supplied the guns and ammo in the truck that Rebecca and Maria roll up in. Which is amazing, I love that for him. Since he's such a minor character, there's not really much I can say about him right up until the thing the anime does, which the manga does not, which I am never going to stop being mad about. See, in the manga, in the final chapter, we see some photos of Havoc going through physical therapy. In the anime, however, apparently that isn't good enough. Now, in the anime, Mustang has to insist that Marco use the Philosopher's Stone to insta-heal Havoc, and honestly, I am even more upset by this after learning that he was already on the road to some kind of recovery in the manga. I would still be upset even if he was just a full-time wheelchair user in the end, but at least then I could kind of understand where the anime was coming from, in a fucked up ableist sort of way. And of course, I have saved the worst for last. I've already talked about Roy in length in the other video I linked at the start of this one, so I won't dive too deep here. Suffice it to say, I despise the ending he got. He spent a total of maybe a week being blind and seemed perfectly willing and determined to adapt, but no. Once again, that's not good enough, and in strolls Marco with the Philosopher's Stone, and I am this close to tearing my hair out in frustration. All in all, Fullmetal Alchemist is surprisingly good about how it handles disability in general. It has multiple disabled characters, as well as showcasing different kinds of disabilities. Sure, amputees dominate the narrative, but they're not the only kind of disabled people we see, and there are even some neurodivergent characters. Well, there's Sheska. And while she's kind of a stereotype as far as being the probably but we won't say it autistic person with an encyclopedic memory for their special interest, who is so fixated on it that she gets fired from her job, at least she's there. I mean, Winry, Ed, and Al have all always read as some kind of ND to me, but that's probably just me projecting, so I'm not going to give the story any points for that. And we have a couple characters on the good guy team with facial differences. Sure, one of them got his as a method to hide his identity and has some interesting things to say about it.
No, this is the face a man like me deserves to wear.
And the other was introduced to us as a serial killer, but it's something, at least. Unfortunately, the gold-toothed doctor also exists, so before I wrap this up, I have just one final thing I want to consider, and that is, well, do we count Nina post the absolute nightmare her garbage can of a father put her through as disabled? I'm kind of inclined to say yes. If she'd continued to grow, she would have grown into a body that has to walk on 4 legs and doesn't have thumbs. Her speaking ability was also clearly impacted. I'm unsure if her stilted speech was because she was trying to talk with entirely different anatomy, or because of some kind of traumatic brain injury that happened during the transmutation. But either way, I would say, yeah, Nina counts as disabled. And that means we do indeed have the murder of a disabled child out of a fucked up sense of mercy on our hands, which is horrible, but unfortunately not entirely outside the realm of possibility. It might also be why I'm so desperate for a good fanfic where she gets to grow up and learn to function in this extremely fucked up new reality that her sperm donor forced on her. Fullmetal Alchemist stumbles over some unfortunate tropes in places. I mean, given the fact that at least 3 of the disabled characters we meet in the story are disabled because they went through the portal of truth and it took a toll, it could easily have tipped over into a disability as punishment style narrative, but it never did, at least not the way I see it, mostly because all of the people who have committed the taboo, who we meet, did so out of desperation and grief, and they're never presented as deserving of any sort of punishment. And then also the fact that other disabled characters exist around them. And of course, as far as bad tropes go, it falls flat on its face at the very end with Mustang, but in general there's more positive than negative here. It's really rare that we get a series with more disabled characters than I can count on one hand, but Fullmetal Alchemist did it. And somehow there are still anime bros out there who don't think an anime with a disabled protagonist could work. Fancy that. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, consider liking it and maybe subscribing. I will be back here Thursday after next. Bye!